HOA Karen stormed into a retired lineman's lake cabin, not knowing he was meeting the state attorney general. "I don't care if you have the Pope in here, Jack." Brenda's voice shattered the quiet as she shoved the cabin door open, letting in a blast of freezing rain. "You have exactly 24 hours to dismantle that hideous metal monstrosity outside, or the HOA is seizing this property." She slammed a thick binder onto the oak table, glaring at Jack and the quiet man in the tailored suit sitting across from him. "Your illegal power rig is an eyesore. I'm issuing a daily fine of $500, and your little lawyer friend here can't stop me." The man slowly closed his briefcase. "Ma'am," Marcus said softly, "do you know what a state attorney general does?" The air inside the cabin smelled of dark roast coffee, aged pine, and the faint, metallic tang of ozone that seemed to permanently cling to Jack's skin. For 35 years, Jack had made his living suspended in the sky, a high-voltage lineman dancing with lethal currents to keep civilization humming. His hands were thick, scarred maps of close calls and brutal winters, and his shoulders carried the permanent ache of hauling heavy gear up splintering wooden poles in the dead of night. Retirement had brought him to this secluded lakefront, to a solid hand-built cabin nestled at the edge of what had recently, and unfortunately, become the Whispering Pines luxury estates. Across the heavy oak table sat Marcus. To anyone else, Marcus was just another suit from the city, a man whose immaculate tailoring seemed wildly out of place against the backdrop of Jack's taxidermy and cast-iron cookware. But Marcus was the state attorney general, and he had come to the lake quietly, off the books, chasing a trail of municipal corruption that was dangerously close to boiling over. Spread between them were dozens of blueprints, engineering schematics, and highly classified utility manifests. Outside, the sky was bruised an ugly, violent shade of purple. The barometric pressure had been plunging steadily since noon, a heavy, suffocating drop that Jack could feel deep in his surgically repaired knees. A massive, historic ice storm was rolling off the lake, bringing with it a deep freeze that the local weather stations were already calling a once-in-a-century event. "Look right here," Jack said, tapping a thick, calloused index finger against a sprawling electrical diagram of the Whispering Pines subdivision. "The developer who bought the land north of my property line, the one who set up the new HOA, he cut every corner in the book. He buried the distribution lines to make the neighborhood look pretty, but he didn't use the proper conduit shielding for this soil type. Worse, he used subpar aluminum wiring to feed the secondary transformers. It's cheap, it expands and contracts under heavy load, and it's prone to microfractures in sub-zero temperatures." Marcus leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. His eyes were sharp, missing nothing. "And the municipal inspector signed off on this? Even with the grid load required to heat 75 luxury mansions? Signed off, stamped it, and probably took a nice envelope of cash for his trouble," Jack replied, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "I spent 3 decades fixing exactly this kind of disaster. When the temperature drops tonight and everyone in those glass houses turns their electric heat pumps up to 72, the draw on that fragile, underground aluminum is going to be astronomical. Add the weight of the ice on the main feeder lines coming into the valley, and the entire subdivision is a ticking time bomb. The grid won't just fail, it will catastrophically cascade." Marcus let out a slow, measured breath, making a meticulous note on his legal pad. "Which brings us to your setup. The one the HOA has been trying to force you to tear down for the last 6 months. Jack chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. He turned his head to look out the frosted window. About 30 yards from the cabin sat a heavy, reinforced concrete pad. Anchored to it was an industrial, military-grade diesel generator, paired with a massive, weather-beaten manual transfer switch and a bank of deep-cycle marine batteries housed in a corrugated steel shed. Towering above it was an exposed, thick, copper grounding array that looked like something out of a Cold War bunker. It was loud, it was aggressively industrial, and it was entirely off-grid. It was the unconventional choice of a man who knew precisely how fragile the modern world was. The HOA mandate says all utilities must be hidden, aesthetically pleasing, and integrated into their smart grid, Jack explained, shaking his head. "They told me my system was an eyesore that lowered property values. They demanded I hook into their shiny new underground system and scrap my generator. But I know a survival truth that those folks in their McMansions don't. Nature doesn't care about curb appeal. When the extreme hits, you want heavy, ugly, and mechanical. You want analog redundancy. A smart grid is only smart until the computer brain freezes or the cheap wire snaps. My rig? I can fix it with a wrench and a prayer, and it will run through hell freezing over. Marcus nodded slowly, gathering the papers. Your testimony is going to nail this developer, Jack. The fraud here isn't just financial. It's a profound public safety hazard. The state is preparing criminal indictments. We just needed the technical validation from an expert to secure the warrants. As Marcus spoke, the wind outside shifted. It was no longer a whistle. It was a deep, resonant howl that shook the heavy timber framing of the cabin. The rain hitting the window glass suddenly changed pitch, turning into the hard, rhythmic ticking of freezing sleet. The temperature was plummeting faster than anticipated. Jack stood up, grabbing an iron poker to stoke the massive stone fireplace. We need to wrap this up, Marcus. You aren't driving back to the capital tonight. The roads are already glazing over. You'll be staying here. It's going to be a long, dark night for the rest of the valley. Just as Jack drove the poker into a glowing log, sending a shower of bright orange sparks up the chimney, heavy, frantic footsteps stomped onto the wooden porch outside. The sound of angry, rhythmic pounding hammered against the solid oak of the front door. Before Jack could even call out, the latch clicked, and the storm was forced inside. The wind howled like a wounded animal as the heavy cabin door swung inward, bringing with it a violent swirl of sleet and freezing rain. Standing in the threshold was Brenda, the president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. She was a woman who seemingly ran on a mixture of pure entitlement and manicured rage, clutching a thick, leather-bound binder to her chest like a shield. She wore a designer wool coat that was already soaking through, and her usually pristine hair was plastered against her cheeks by the storm. Yet, the lethal weather outside seemed completely secondary to her blinding obsession with HOA regulations. She shoved the door shut behind her, leaving a trail of icy water on Jack's hand-woven rug. She didn't pause to wipe her feet, nor did she acknowledge the severe drop in temperature she had just let into the room. Her eyes, narrowed and furious, locked immediately onto Jack, completely ignoring the quiet, well-dressed man sitting at the table. I have had it with you, Jack, Brenda snapped, her voice shrill enough to cut through the howling wind outside. She marched forward, her expensive boots clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. I have left 4 voicemails. I have sent 3 certified letters. And yet, I drive past your property this evening, and that hideous, industrial monstrosity is still sitting in your yard, completely ruining the sightlines from the lake. Jack slowly rested the iron poker against the stone hearth. He wiped his hands on a rag, his face a mask of practiced stoicism. Brenda, it's 20 degrees outside and dropping fast. The roads are turning to glass. What are you doing out driving in this? I am doing my job as the elected president of this community. She fired back, slamming her thick binder onto the oak table, right next to Marcus's neat stack of legal documents. Marcus calmly slid his papers back an inch, watching her with the detached, clinical fascination of a biologist observing an aggressive, invasive species. You do not live in a vacuum, Jack, Brenda continued, her voice escalating in pitch. She flipped the binder open, revealing tabs color-coded with obsessive precision. You are part of Whispering Pines now, whether you like it or not. The developer specifically annexed your property lines into the HOA charter. Section 4, paragraph B, clearly states that all external utility structures must be aesthetically concealed and painted in approved earth tones. Your setup is slate gray metal and rusted copper. It looks like a Soviet compound. You are terrifying the neighbors. The neighbors are terrified of a generator? Jack asked, his voice low and incredibly calm. Or are they just terrified of something they don't understand? I am not here to debate your paranoid, survivalist philosophy, Brenda sneered, jabbing a manicured finger at his chest. I am here to enforce the rules. You were ordered to connect to the community's smart grid 3 months ago. You refused. Therefore, as of this evening, I am officially issuing a daily fine of $500. Furthermore, if that machine is not dismantled by tomorrow noon, the HOA board will seek an emergency injunction to have contractors remove it at your expense, and we will place a lien on this cabin. Jack sighed, a deep, tired sound. He looked toward the frosted window. The sleet had turned to heavy, driving ice. Brenda, listen to me carefully. I spent my entire life building and fixing power grids. The system your developer put in the ground is garbage. It's overloaded, it's insulated poorly, and it cannot handle the thermal stress of the weather event that is currently sitting right on top of us. You shouldn't be worrying about my generator. You should be worrying about your own house. Brenda let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Oh, please. Don't try to lecture me with your blue-collar conspiracy theories. Whispering Pines has a state-of-the-art, multi-million-dollar subterranean electrical system. It is immune to weather. The developer guaranteed it. We have the best infrastructure in the county. You have the prettiest infrastructure in the county, Jack corrected softly. There's a massive difference. When ice builds up on the main transmission lines coming over the mountain, the voltage is going to spike and drop. Your smart grid is going to try to compensate, but that cheap aluminum wiring under your manicured lawns is going to overheat and snap. You are going to lose power, Brenda. All of you. Enough, Brenda shouted, slamming her hand on the table. She finally turned her glare toward Marcus, taking in his tailored suit and quiet demeanor. She sneered, assuming she had the upper hand. And who is this? Did you hire some cheap, strip mall lawyer to try and scare me? It won't work. The HOA has a massive legal defense fund. Your little friend here is out of his league. In fact, you're both trespassing on HOA-regulated land as far as I'm concerned. Marcus didn't blink. He didn't raise his voice. He simply closed his briefcase with a soft, definitive click. He looked up at Brenda, his eyes cold and sharp. Ma'am, Marcus said softly, his tone carrying the immense, crushing weight of state authority. Do you know what a state attorney general does? Brenda froze. The mocking smile died on her lips, her eyes darting between Jack and the man in the suit. Before she could process the question, the world outside answered for her. From miles away, over the ridge, came a sound like a massive shotgun blast. Boom. Jack's head snapped toward the window. There goes the first substation, he muttered. Seconds later, the sky beyond the glass lit up with an apocalyptic, blinding flash of neon blue and eerie green. Another explosion echoed through the valley. This one closer, rattling the teacups in Jack's cupboards. The extreme conditions had arrived, and the fragile veneer of Whispering Pines was about to be violently ripped away. The blue-green light faded, leaving behind an oppressive, heavy blackness. For exactly 3 seconds, the cabin was plunged into total darkness, the only sound the aggressive rattle of ice violently pelting the windows. In the distance, across the lake, the sprawling, brightly lit mansions of Whispering Pines blinked out of existence in near-perfect unison. The modern, state-of-the-art subterranean grid had failed exactly as Jack predicted, catastrophically and completely. Then, the survival truth of Jack's unconventional choice made itself known. A deep, mechanical clack echoed from the heavy transfer switch mounted on the cabin wall. Outside, the military-grade diesel generator roared to life. It wasn't a quiet, polite hum. It was a throaty, rhythmic, industrial thrum that vibrated through the floorboards. It sounded like power. It sounded like defiance. Instantly, the cabin was flooded with warm, golden light. The refrigerator kicked back on, and the electric space heaters in the corners began glowing red. Brenda flinched at the noise, clutching her binder to her chest. Her eyes wide with sudden panic, she stared at the glowing filament of the vintage bulb hanging over the table, then whipped her head around to look out the window. The entire valley was a void. Not a single street lamp, porch light, or security floodlight remained. The luxury estates were swallowed whole by the freezing night. What just happened? Brenda stammered, the haughty arrogance entirely draining from her voice. She stepped closer to the window, pressing her hand against the cold glass. The lights. The whole neighborhood is out. Cascading failure, Jack said grimly, stepping over to a breaker panel and checking the analog gauges. The ice brought down the main feeder line. Your smart grid detected the surge, tried to isolate the fault, and pushed the entire neighborhood's load onto the secondary transformers. Because your developer used cheap, undergauged aluminum wiring, those wires instantly melted. Your subterranean system didn't just fail, Brenda. It fried itself in the ground. You won't have power back for a week. Minimum. Brenda spun around, her face pale, the reality of the plunging temperatures finally piercing her manicured reality. A week? That's impossible. We have smart thermostats. We have heated driveways. You have to do something. Jack, hook your machine up to the neighborhood grid. Send the power back down the line. My house is mostly glass. It will be freezing in hours. Jack shook his head, looking at her with a mixture of pity and frustration. It doesn't work like that, Brenda. You can't just push power into a dead, fried grid. Besides, my generator is sized for this cabin, not 75 mansions. You made your choice. You passed ordinances making it illegal for anyone in Whispering Pines to own a backup generator because they ruined the aesthetic. You traded resilience for curb appeal. You chose pretty over practical. Out here, when the ice storms hit, pretty gets you killed. You can't just leave us in the dark. Brenda's voice was breaking now, bordering on hysteria. I am the HOA president. I demand you find a way to fix this. You're not in a position to demand anything, Brenda. Marcus interrupted, his voice cutting through the panic like a scalpel. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. The Attorney General stepped into the light, his presence suddenly commanding the entire room. Brenda stared at him, trembling. You're really the Attorney General? Marcus Vance, he said coldly. And I've been investigating the developer of Whispering Pines for the last 8 months. We had suspicions he was bribing county inspectors to bypass infrastructure safety codes to maximize his profit margins. He used shell companies to supply substandard materials, putting hundreds of lives at risk. Marcus gestured to the sprawling blueprints on the table. Jack here is my chief expert witness. He was just confirming the exact mechanical failures that your HOA board under your leadership blissfully ignored in favor of worrying about the color of paint on a generator shed. Brenda stumbled backward, hitting the back of a heavy wooden chair. I didn't know. The developer said it was state-of-the-art. He said the HOA needed to maintain strict visual standards to keep property values up. He gave us the charter. He gave you a charter designed to distract you, Marcus corrected sharply. He let you play dictator over fences and paint colors, so you wouldn't ask questions about the fact that your electrical grid was made of tissue paper. And because you were so obsessed with aesthetic control, you aggressively fought the only man in the valley who actually understood how to survive. The wind slammed against the cabin again, a violent reminder of the deadly conditions outside. The temperature in the dark mansions across the lake was already plunging toward the single digits. Pipes would soon burst. Designer hardwood floors would be ruined by freezing water. The luxury of Whispering Pines was actively becoming a frozen tomb. Your developer is going to federal prison, Marcus stated, his voice devoid of sympathy. And when the sun comes up, my office will be opening a full inquiry into the HOA board's complicity in approving those infrastructure plans. But right now, you have a much more immediate problem, Brenda. Brenda looked at the heavy, ticking machinery of Jack's transfer switch, the very thing she had tried to destroy. She looked at the warmth radiating from the fireplace, and then out into the absolute, unforgiving darkness of the neighborhood she ruled. My house, she whispered, her teeth beginning to chatter, though whether from the cold seeping through her wet coat or pure shock, it was hard to tell. My husband is out of town. I'm all alone in that big house. The fireplace it's just gas, an electronic start. It won't work. Jack watched her for a long moment. He had spent his life battling storms, pulling cables through the mud and ice to keep the world warm. He didn't like Brenda. He despised everything she stood for, but a lineman never leaves someone freezing in the dark. Jack sighed, walking over to a heavy wooden trunk at the end of the room. Take off that wet coat, Brenda. Sit by the fire. The night stretched on, an agonizing crawl of time measured only by the relentless howling of the wind and the steady, reassuring thrum of Jack's diesel generator. Outside, the ice storm ravaged the landscape, snapping massive pine branches like dry twigs and entombing the valley in a thick, glittering shell of frozen water. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere had shifted from hostile to deeply reflective. Here, millions of dollars in real estate, designer wardrobes, and HOA bylaws meant absolutely nothing. The only things of value were heat, shelter, and the heavy, ugly machinery keeping them alive. Brenda sat huddled in a large armchair pulled close to the stone hearth. She was wrapped in 2 of Jack's heavy, wool surplus blankets. Her designer coat hung on a peg by the door to dry. The manicured, authoritative tyrant from a few hours ago was gone, replaced by a terrified, shivering woman who was slowly coming to terms with her own profound vulnerability. She clutched a thick ceramic mug of black coffee in both hands, drawing warmth from the clay, her eyes tracking the flickering flames. I can hear the trees snapping, she whispered, her voice fragile. It sounds like gunshots. It's the weight of the ice, Jack replied softly. He was sitting at the table with Marcus, a single desk lamp illuminating the final pages of the deposition. A half-inch of radial ice on a tree branch can add hundreds of pounds of weight. On an electrical wire, it's devastating. That's what brought the main line down. The rest was just the domino effect of cheap infrastructure. Marcus signed the bottom of a heavily redacted document, capping his pen. He slid the papers into his briefcase and locked it. We have everything we need, Jack. Once the state police can get plows up this mountain, I'll initiate the arrest warrants. This disaster is going to be the final nail in the coffin for that development firm. Marcus turned his gaze toward Brenda. And for the HOA charter that enabled them, Brenda didn't argue. She didn't flinch. She just stared into the fire. He told us your machine was a liability, Jack, she murmured, her voice barely audible over the hum of the generator. The developer, he told the board that your off-grid setup was dangerous, that it was an environmental hazard. We believed him because we wanted the neighborhood to look perfect. We wanted the illusion of perfection. Jack leaned back in his chair, folding his scarred hands over his stomach. Perfection is a luxury, Brenda. It's a luxury you can only afford when the sun is shining and the grid is humming. But the grid is fragile. It's built by the lowest bidder, maintained by understaffed crews, and stretched to its absolute breaking point. I spent 35 years climbing poles in the middle of the night, freezing my hands off, just to keep that illusion of perfection alive for people in their warm living rooms. He stood up, walking over to the window and wiping away a patch of condensation. Dawn was beginning to break, painting the sky in pale, bruised hues of gray and cold blue. I built this system because I know what happens when the wire snaps. I made an unconventional choice to prioritize function over form. I sank copper rods deep into the earth. I bought an engine block made of solid iron. It's loud, it's ugly, and it takes up space. But when the world stops, ugly and functional is what keeps your heart beating. Brenda slowly stood up, wrapping the wool blanket tighter around her shoulders. She walked over to the window, standing beside Jack. The view outside was devastatingly beautiful and utterly horrifying. Whispering Pines was a frozen wasteland. The multi-million-dollar homes were encased in ice, their massive geometric windows dark and lifeless. Without power, the luxury homes were little more than elegant, freezing caves. In the distance, the faint, wailing sound of emergency sirens began to echo through the valley. Struggling to navigate the treacherous, blocked roads, smoke drifted lazily from Jack's chimney, and the steady, rhythmic chug-chug-chug of the generator was the only sign of mechanical life for miles. Jack's cabin was a solitary beacon of warmth and light in a sea of dark, freezing opulence. Brenda looked at the heavy steel shed housing the generator. She didn't see an eyesore anymore. She saw a lifeline. She saw the undeniable hidden survival truth that she had been too blind to recognize. "I'm sorry, Jack," Brenda said, her voice cracking. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and sudden, spilling over her cheeks. It wasn't just an apology for the threats or the fines. It was an apology for her entire worldview. "I was so incredibly stupid. I almost destroyed the only thing that could save us." "You didn't know," Jack said gently, his gruff exterior softening just a fraction. He turned away from the window and headed toward the kitchen area. "But you know now. The rules change when the ice comes. Now, who wants eggs? That generator has plenty of juice, and my electric skillet is ready to go. We're going to be stuck here for a while." Marcus smiled faintly, loosening his tie. "I'll take mine scrambled, Jack, and I think we'll have plenty to discuss about the future of this valley." Brenda watched the two men, a profound sense of gratitude washing over her. She looked one last time at the frozen, dead neighborhood she had once ruled, then turned her back on it, walking toward the warmth of the fire. The storm raged on, but inside the lineman's cabin, the light held steady. When the ice finally thawed and the roads cleared, the aftermath was swift. Marcus's investigation led to the immediate arrest of the corrupt developer and a complete dissolution of the tyrannical HOA charter. Whispering Pines faced months of grueling, expensive repairs to rebuild their shattered superficial grid. Meanwhile, Jack's ugly generator continued to hum, a testament to the undeniable truth that when nature unleashes her fury, aesthetics will never save you. Resilience, preparation, and hard-earned wisdom always will. If you enjoyed this cinematic story of survival and justice, please hit the like button, share it with someone who appreciates true preparedness, and subscribe for more intense, real-life dramatic stories.